It's the late 1990s, and I'm at university. The TV screen in our hall of residence was enormous. By today's comparison, it's not very big. But it was like a movie theatre to us. And every week there was a movie shown, and it was just a little fundraiser. One week there was a movie showing that I had already seen and had a really powerful first scene. And so I turned to my friend who was organising the event and said, "Do you mind if I just sit in and watch the first scene and then I'll leave?" So I sit down at the front and we watch the first scene, and it's very powerful on this big screen. And at the moment the scene finishes, I'm just about to get out of my seat, and my friend comes over to me and says, "Come on, Neil, time to pay up, don't be so Jewish." Years later, I still remember that. I remember every instance of where I had been othered, where I had experienced anti-Semitism, as almost all of us do. Because anti-Semitism is something that has existed for thousands of years and is certainly not going away. And it's really important for the Jewish community to address anti-Semitism, to call it out when we see it, and to help correct it. In that particular instance, that person is still a friend of mine, and I had to share with her how hurt I was by what she had said, even though she had thought it was a joke. And I'm sure she doesn't remember that, but I still very much do. And there are times when we face anti-Semitism where we call it out and we educate and we help people be better. We help them realize the comments that they made that may have been anti-Semitic without them realizing. And then there's the other form of anti-Semitism too, the much more horrifying, difficult one, which is the one that's deliberate. And we have a responsibility as a temple community to face this, to face both forms of anti-Semitism. And I've had to do a lot of work in the last few years to address this. In this country, around the world, but especially in this country, the number of reported incidents of anti-Semitism has skyrocketed, especially since the year 2016. And when I give presentations in schools, I show them the chart that shows the number of recorded incidents of anti-Semitism in this country and how it started just rising at an enormous level from 2016. And I'm not allowed to say why, but I say to them, you may want to think about what was happening in this country at this time, and you may want to think about which leaders were saying things in relation to, for example, neo-Nazi protests in the streets. And you may want to ask yourself why anti-Semitism may have increased from 2016, in particular in this country. And what we know is that the number of reported incidents is far, far below the actual number of incidents. Anti-Semitism is on the dramatic rise in this country, in this state, and in this city. And I have been going into schools to work with particular schools that have faced some issues of anti-Semitism. Schools that have had swastikas drawn in various places. Schools where Jewish students have been shown ovens to imply you'll be ending up in one of these at some point soon. Schools where students have made comments, have made anti-Semitic jokes, and where the staff have said it was just light-hearted humour and not anything serious, even though they would say very different things with regards to other forms of so-called humour. If it were humour about race or humour about sexuality or gender, they would say something very different. And I've not just been working with individual schools and indeed supporting individual principals, helping them to work out policies, but I'm also working with the entire Santa Fe public school system to help create a training program for all staff in the Santa Fe public schools so that they can respond to anti-Semitism appropriately. As well as I and Ellen and others are working with students who seem to be facing this a lot to help support them to work out appropriate responses and to work with the schools to help make sure that the schools are attentive to the needs of Jewish students, of those particular students. There's a lot of work. There's work in local community when there's pressure by certain individuals in town to boycott certain events because it's a Jewish speaker or a speaker who may be connected to Israel in some way and therefore ... and it always ends up in some form of anti-Semitism. We face a real challenge, and these are scary times. And so last week I shared all the different ways that you could be involved in our social action coalition, which is forming. And we've had many positive responses, and we're hoping for many more as well. But separate, and I did say last week, separate is the threat of anti-Semitism. We work with other Jewish organizations, including the JCRC of New Mexico, to help address anti-Semitism on a larger basis. But we in our community also need to address it, because we are the oldest and the largest Jewish community in Santa Fe by far. We have a moral responsibility, an ethical responsibility to go out and to teach others, to help people realize where they may have been anti-Semitic without realizing it, and to gently correct them, or to call out openly anti-Semitic abuse and to challenge it. And we also need to educate our members, to help you acquire skills, essentially, in how to address anti-Semitism. I remember a story from my childhood, which was told with a lot of pride, of my grandpa Joe, who one day was walking home with Grandma Trudy, and there was a man on the street nearby who had been drinking, who was spouting anti-Semitic nonsense at him. And my grandfather's response was to walk up and punch him in the face, and then to go home. And that did stop him from his anti-Semitism of the time, but didn't really address the issue. But that was a story of family pride, that we stood up to the Nazis, to the neo-Nazis, to the anti-Semites. And in fact, interestingly, on the other side of the family, they really did stand up and fight against neo-Nazis, not only in the war, but in the Battle of Cable Street. I recommend you look it up online, where some of the members of my family rolled up their shirt sleeves and just openly fought the brown shirts of Mosley and others. But we can't do that. We can't walk around punching people in the face whenever they say something anti-Semitic. We need tools. And so our community needs to help members have tools on how to address anti-Semitism. We need to learn about anti-Semitism, and we need to support each other in a time of increased anti-Semitism. And so that's why we're putting something together which I guess is provisionally called the TBS Task Force on Anti-Semitism, the TBS Anti-Semitism Group, whatever it is. It's a group of people who are going to help us address anti-Semitism. And by address anti-Semitism, I mean to help continue the work that I'm doing in schools and in businesses, to also bring in speakers, and to help support our members pastorally and to train our members in addressing anti-Semitism. We don't want to define ourselves as a Jewish community by how we respond to the hatred of others or to the ignorance of others. And yet, we cannot avoid it. We have to be aware of it, of the ignorance and the hatred of some others, and we have to respond to it appropriately. And we, as the largest and oldest Jewish community in Santa Fe by far, have that responsibility to do exactly that. So, if you would like to help us address anti-Semitism, and we have lots of suggestions already, but we're open to many more. If you would like to help Temple Beth Shalom address anti-Semitism, please let us know. Please email me, please email the office, please call the office, please come in and see me. I'm in the office most days. Please come in, and if you want to talk, we'll talk about what you might be able to offer, and we'll gather people together. And as a temple community, we will address anti-Semitism on a much more formal way, a much more structured way in this year. So please, if this is something you think you want to help address, please be in touch. Lots of things happening this Shabbat. We have an early service today with a potluck, so please come and join us for that. Tomorrow, Torah study, I was going to say is really interesting, but it's always really interesting. But tomorrow's Torah study is about relational Judaism and how the Torah portion teaches us how to create a successful Jewish community. It's a really interesting worksheet created by someone else that I'm going to be sharing. It's very powerful. And then, of course, join us also for our Shabbat Shacharit service, which you can join in person or you can join on Zoom if you want. I wish you a safe Shabbat, a Shabbat that is freed from hatred of others and ignorance of others. And I hope after Shabbat you might be able to be in touch, either to help us with so many of the social action projects that I mentioned last week, or to help our temple community address anti-Semitism moving forward. I hope to see you or hear from you soon, and wish you Shabbat Shalom.